My name is Lyra. I was born into a dynasty of sound, where every breath was a crescendo and every heartbeat followed a metronome. My father was a world-renowned conductor, my mother a concert pianist whose fingers moved like lightning over ivory. And then there was my sister, Aria, the golden voice. In our house, music wasn't a passion, it was a hierarchy. From the age of 5, I was told I was tone deaf, a biological glitch in a bloodline of genius. They didn't banish me, they did something worse. They made me the ghost in the wings. I became Aria's shadow, the silent assistant who ironed her gowns, managed her riders, and stood in the darkness while she bathed in the spotlight. For years, I believed them. I believed the silence was my only contribution. But in the dead of night, in a hidden basement studio built from discarded gear and stolen moments, I started to create a sound they couldn't even imagine. Today, I am Vesper, the anonymous producer behind the biggest hits on the planet. And today, the sister who told me I was nothing is knocking on my door, begging for a miracle to save her dying career. The house on Belvedere Hill was always vibrating. It was a grand Victorian structure that leaked music from every seam. In the morning, it was the sharp percussive scales from my mother's grand piano in the East Wing. In the afternoon, it was the sweeping operatic trills of Aria practicing her arias in the conservatory. And in the evening, it was my father's records, played at a volume that demanded total submission. I remember sitting on the stairs at 7 years old, trying to hum along to a Mozart concerto. I felt the melody in my chest, a warm golden thread that I wanted to pull out into the air. "Lyra, stop that at once," my father said, not even looking up from his scores. "You're flat, painfully flat. It's like hearing a rusted hinge trying to sing. Go help your mother with the sheet music." That was the first time I felt the door close. By 12, the door was locked. My parents had decided that since I couldn't hear the notes they did, I would be the administrative backbone of the family excellence. While Aria was sent to the finest conservatories in Milan and New York, I was sent to business school to learn how to manage her future tours. "It's for the best, darling," my mother would say, her eyes always fixed on Aria's throat as if it were a fragile diamond. "Aria has the gift, but she lacks the discipline for the details. You have the head for the boring things. You'll be her guardian. It's a noble role, really." A noble role meant being the girl who fetched lukewarm lemon water at 3 a.m. because Aria's vocal cords felt tight. It meant standing in the freezing draft of a backstage door to ensure no unauthorized fans disturbed her meditation. It meant listening to Aria complain about the lack of soul in modern music, while I spent my nights staring at digital waveforms on a laptop I'd bought with saved lunch money. Because they were wrong. I wasn't tone deaf. I just didn't hear music as a series of rigid classical rules. I heard it as textures. I heard it in the rhythm of the rain hitting the window, in the low-frequency hum of the city's power grid, in the jagged, beautiful glitches of a broken radio. When I was 19, I found an abandoned basement under the old carriage house. It was damp, smelling of earth and old wood, but it was far enough away that the vibration of the main house couldn't reach it. I moved my equipment there, piece by piece. A second-hand synthesizer, a high-end microphone I'd borrowed from Aria's old gear, and a software suite that allowed me to manipulate sound until it became something otherworldly. I called myself Vesper, not a person, but a time of day, the moment when the light fails and the real shadows come out to play. I started posting my tracks anonymously. I didn't use lyrics at first, just complex, haunting soundscapes that seemed to tap into something primal. Then I started using my own voice, not the operatic voice my father demanded, but a low, breathy, textured vocal that I layered 50 times over until it sounded like a choir of ghosts. The first track went viral in a week. The second was picked up by a major film trailer. By the third, Vesper was the name every label was chasing. They thought I was a collective in Berlin or a reclusive genius in Tokyo. They never suspected it was the girl in the oversized hoodie carrying Aria's dry cleaning. "Have you heard this Vesper person?" Aria asked one morning, scrolling through her phone while I steamed her silk robe for the gala. "It's so industrial, so unrefined. It's barely music. It's just noise." "People seem to like it," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "People like fast food, Lyra," she snapped, checking her reflection. "But they come to me for art. My tour is sold out, and the critics are calling my New Year's performance the event of the decade. I don't have to worry about Vesper and her digital tricks." But the new year came and the world changed. The demand for classical purity started to fade. The charts were dominated by the very noise Aria despised. Her latest album, a collection of traditional ballads, stalled at number 40. Her tour dates were being quietly downgraded to smaller theaters. And then came the silence. The Belvedere house wasn't vibrating anymore. My mother's piano was closed more often than not. My father's records were silent. The only sound was the frantic pacing of Aria in the conservatory, her voice cracking as she tried to reach the high notes that used to come so easily. "It's the production," she shouted at dinner last night, throwing her fork down. "The producers I'm working with are hacks. They don't know how to frame my voice like this. I need someone who understands the new sound. I need Vesper." I sat there, cutting my steak into perfect, silent squares. "I've sent 5 emails to Vesper's management," my father said, his face shadowed with worry. "No response. They say Vesper only works with people who have raw potential. They're elitist in their own dirty way." "Lyra," Aria said, her eyes turning to me with a desperate, sharp light, "you've been managing my schedule for years. You have the contacts. Find her. Find Vesper. Offer her whatever she wants. My career depends on it." I looked at my sister, the girl who had told me I was tone deaf every day for 20 years. I looked at my parents, who had treated my ears as if they were broken instruments. "I'll see what I can do," I said quietly. I went down to my basement studio that night. I sat in the dark, surrounded by the glowing blue lights of my monitors. I opened the management inbox for Vesper. There it was, an email from the Thorne and Vance Management Group, my own father's company, begging for a collaboration. I typed a single sentence in response. "Meeting scheduled tomorrow, 10 p.m., the old carriage house, basement. Come alone." I hit send. Then I walked to the corner of the room and picked up the microphone. I started to sing, not a scale, not an aria, but a low, powerful melody that vibrated through the floorboards of the house, rattling the crystal chandeliers in the rooms above where they still thought I was silent. The ghost was finally ready to speak, and her voice was going to cost them everything. The basement of the carriage house was a different world. Upstairs, the mansion was a museum of polished wood and classical pretension. Down here, it was a cathedral of electricity. Blue and amber LED strips traced the lines of the soundproofing foam, and the air hummed with the low-frequency thrum of my custom-built subwoofers. I sat in my swivel chair, my back to the heavy steel door, my face illuminated by the triple monitor setup that displayed the jagged, beautiful architecture of my latest track. I heard the door groan. I heard Aria's expensive heels click hesitantly on the concrete floor, a sharp staccato rhythm that sounded out of place in my sanctuary. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice stripped of its operatic projection. Is Vesper here? I'm Aria Thorne. We had an appointment." I didn't turn around immediately. I reached out and tapped a key, launching the playback of her latest single, the one that had flopped on the charts. I'd isolated her vocal track, stripping away the expensive orchestral backing. Without the fluff, her voice sounded thin, dated and desperately lonely. "Stop that," Arya snapped, her ego flaring up even in the darkness. "Who's playing that? That's a private demo." I slowly spun the chair around. I was wearing my usual oversized black hoodie, the hood pulled back, my hair messy from 10 hours of mixing. I let the blue light of the monitors hit my face directly. Arya froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, an ironic silence for the golden voice of the family. She looked at me, then at the rack of high-end preamps, then at the gold records for Vesper's singles leaning against the brick wall. "Lyra?" she finally gasped, her voice cracking. "What is this? What are you doing in Vesper's studio? Did you break in? Are you her assistant here too?" "I don't have an assistant, Arya," I said, my voice low and steady, amplified slightly by the studio monitors, so it seemed to surround her. "And I didn't break in. I built this. Every wire, every patch, every beat." "You?" Arya laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound that echoed off the soundproofing. No, that's impossible. You're tone deaf. Dad said so. Mom said so. You can't even tune a guitar without a digital tuner. You're the girl who handles my travel visas." "I handled your visas so I could buy this equipment in London and Berlin without you noticing," I said, standing up. I walked over to the microphone, the one I'd used to record the hits that had pushed her off the charts. "I'd let you believe I was deaf so I could hear what you were too arrogant to notice, that the world moved on from your 3-octave trills 10 years ago." "You lied to us," Arya whispered, her face pale. "All those years? You watched me struggle with my last album. You watched Dad worry about the mortgage on the estate. You had the Vesper sound, and you didn't give it to your own sister?" "Give it to you?" I stepped into her personal space, the scent of her expensive French perfume clashing with the smell of warm electronics and ozone. "You don't even know what to do with it, Arya. You don't sing from your heart. You sing from a textbook. You treat music like a competition you've already won." "I need a hit, Arya," she pleaded, her voice suddenly small, the entitlement replaced by a raw, terrifying desperation. "The label is dropping me. If I don't have a Vesper-produced track by next month, I'm finished. Please, we're blood. Just give me one song, one of the ones you have tucked away on those hard drives." I walked back to my console and pulled up a file. It was a track I'd written a week ago, a dark, haunting masterpiece called The Shadow's Tongue. I pressed play. The bass was a physical force, a deep tectonic rumble that made the jewelry on Arya's neck rattle. Over the beat, a distorted, ghostly vocal started to weave a melody that felt like a secret being whispered in a graveyard. It was modern, it was dangerous, it was everything Arya wasn't. "Oh my God," she breathed, her eyes widening. "That's the song that saves me. I can hear my voice on that. I can see the video. Lyra, please, sell it to me. I'll give you whatever percentage you want. I'll tell Dad the truth. I'll make you my head producer." "Make me?" I cut the music abruptly, the silence hitting like a physical blow. "You still don't get it, do you? You're not in a position to make me anything. You came here begging for Vesper, not realizing that Vesper is the sister you treated like a maid." "I'll pay anything," she said, her voice trembling. "My voice is too expensive for you, Arya," I said, leaning over the console. "Because the price isn't money, the price is the truth, and you're too afraid of the truth to ever sing a Vesper song." "What do you want?" she asked, tears finally spilling over. "I want you to go back to the house," I pointed to the door. "I want you to sit at dinner with Mom and Dad, and I want you to listen to them talk about how tone deaf I am. And I want you to stay silent, just like I did. For every day that you stay silent, I'll consider giving you a track. But the moment you try to take credit from my sound, the moment you tell them Vesper is just your little sister, I'll release the raw stems of your last recording session, the ones where you were so off-key the auto-tune broke." Arya looked at me with pure, unadulterated fear. She realized she wasn't the star of the family anymore. She was a tenant in a world I owned. "You're a monster," she whispered. "No," I smiled, a cold, sharp expression. "I'm a producer, and I just decided your career isn't worth airtime. Now get out of my studio. I have a real artist coming in at midnight." As she stumbled out into the night, I turned back to my monitors. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a rhythm that was faster than any beat I'd ever programmed. I wasn't the shadow anymore. I was the one holding the spotlight, and I was just getting started.
The air in the grand drawing room felt like a drawn bowstring, ready to snap and pierce the heart of anyone standing in its way. My father, Silas, was in his element, which meant he was directing everyone as if we were instruments in his private orchestra. The room had been transformed into a high-end broadcast studio, filled with softbox lights, multicam setups, and a grand piano that had been polished until it shone like black ice. "The world needs to see the pedigree, Arya," Silas said, his voice booming with a manic authority. "They've been distracted by the Vesper noise, by that digital garbage. Tonight, we remind them of the Thorn legacy, pure, unadulterated talent. No auto-tune, no filters, just the voice and the keys." He turned to me, his gaze cold and dismissive, as if I were a piece of furniture that had been moved into the wrong corner. "Lyra, you will sit in the shadows behind the curtain. You'll handle the soundboard and the backing tracks for the interludes, and for the finale, you'll play the secondary piano parts from the alcove. Don't let your clumsy fingers ruin Arya's resonance. Stay in the dark where you belong." Arya stood by the window, her face a mask of pale terror. She looked at me, her eyes screaming the secret we shared. She knew that the digital garbage she was supposed to denounce was currently the only thing keeping her name on anyone's lips. She knew that every time our father insulted Vesper, he was insulting the only person who could save her. "Dad, maybe we should modernize the program," Arya suggested, her voice thin and wavering. "Modernize? For what? To cater to the deaf?" Silas laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "We are thorns. We don't chase trends. We set the standard. Lyra, get to the soundboard. The live stream starts in 20 minutes. 10 million people are tuned in to see the golden voice reclaim her throne." I walked behind the heavy velvet curtain into the small, cramped alcove where the technical gear was hidden. I looked at the soundboard, the very board Silas thought was just a tool for his daughter's vanity. He didn't know I'd repatched every input. He didn't know that the backing tracks he'd asked me to prepare were actually layered with subsonics and Vesper-grade distortions that would react to the frequency of Arya's voice. I put on my headphones. The silence of the alcove felt like the calm before a hurricane. "5 minutes to air," the floor manager shouted. Arya took her position in the center of the room, the lights hitting her silk gown until she glowed like a dying star. She looked beautiful, a perfect porcelain doll of a singer, but as she opened her mouth for the first warming-up trill, I saw her throat tighten. The pressure of the Thorn legacy was a noose, and our father was the one pulling the rope. "Welcome, world, to the Thorn estate," Silas said, addressing the camera with a practiced predatory charm. "Tonight we strip away the artifice. Tonight you hear the true music." The concert began with a Bach aria. It was technically perfect, but hollow. Aria's voice was like a ghost haunting its own body. I watched the live chat feed on my monitor. User 44. "Is it just me, or is she sounding a bit thin? Music snob. It's so boring. This isn't art, it's a museum exhibit. Vesper fan. Where's the soul? Where's the beat?" I waited for the finale, the moment Silas had planned to be the ultimate proof of their superiority. It was a complex, dramatic piece he'd composed himself, meant to showcase Arya's range.
And now, Silas announced, his eyes gleaming with ego, a world premiere, The Sovereign Heart, Lyra, the backing track, now. I didn't play the track he'd approved. I hit the trigger for a Vesper original, a track titled The Architect's Silence. A deep, bone-shaking bass pulse suddenly filled the room, so low it made the crystal decanters on the sideboard vibrate. Silas froze, his baton hovering in midair. Arya's eyes went wide. The rhythm was jagged, industrial, and impossibly infectious. "What is this?" Silas hissed, turning toward the curtain. "Lyra, stop this noise!" But the live stream numbers were exploding. User 44. Wait, is that a Vesper beat? Trendy news. The Thorns are collaborating with Vesper. Game changer. Viral moments. Look at Arya's face. She's actually trying to keep up. Arya, sensing the shift in the energy, made a choice. She didn't stop. She realized that the pure performance was a disaster, but the noise was a lifeline. She started to sing, but she didn't use the operatic technique Silas had forced her upon. She lowered her register, her voice becoming breathy, textured, and raw, the way I'd taught her in the basement. She was singing over my beat, following the hidden melodies I was feeding into her earpiece. For the first time in her life, she sounded like a real person instead of a recording. "Stop it!" Silas roared, throwing his baton at the curtain. He stepped into the shot, his face purple with rage. "This is a disgrace! This is not music! Lyra, I'll kill you for this!" The camera caught everything. The world saw the great conductor lose his mind, screaming at his tone-deaf daughter, while his golden daughter finally found her soul in the chaos. I stepped out from behind the curtain, my hand still on the portable controller. I didn't hide. I walked into the light, my eyes fixed on my father. "The music isn't a disgrace, Dad," I said, my voice carrying over the speakers, clear and resonant. "The hierarchy is. You told me I couldn't hear, but the world is listening to my sound right now. 10 million people just watched you try to silence the only thing that was actually saving your legacy." I looked at the monitor. The viewer count was at 15 million. "The concert is over," I said, hitting the kill switch on the stream. The room plunged into a deafening silence. Silas was gasping for air, clutching the piano for support. Margaret was frozen in the doorway, her hands over her mouth. And Arya was sitting on the floor, her gown ruined, but for the first time she wasn't crying. She was breathing. "You've ruined us," Silas whispered, his voice broken. "The critics, the patrons, they saw me lose control. They saw the noise." "They saw the truth," I said, walking toward the door. "They saw that the girl you treated like a servant is the one who owns the future of this family's sound. And Arya, if you ever want to sing like that again, you know where the basement is. But don't bring him. He's not invited to the future." I walked out of the drawing room and down the stairs, the vibration of my own music still humming in my bones. I wasn't just Vesper anymore. I was the one who had broken the silence of Belvedere Hill, and the echoes were going to be heard for a very, very long time. The library was a tomb of leather-bound books and broken dreams. Silas sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his face a mask of cold, calculated fury. He had traded his conductor's baton for a gold-plated pen, and spread out before him were stacks of legal documents that looked like a declaration of war. "Sit down, Lyra," he commanded, not looking up. "We've had our lawyers look into this Vesper entity. It's quite impressive, I'll admit. A digital empire built under my very roof. But you've forgotten the fundamental rule of this house. Ex unitate vires. From unity, strength. And from the patriarch, ownership." I sat across from him, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I didn't wear the hoodie today. I wore a sharp, tailored blazer. I looked like the CEO I had secretly become. The Thorne Family Trust has a clause, Lyra, he continued, finally meeting my eyes with a predatory glint. Any intellectual property created by a member of the household using family resources, including the carriage house, the Belvedere estate, and the rights to the name Thorne in any commercial musical context, belongs to the trust, which I control. You didn't build a career, you built a family asset, and I am here to collect. Margaret stood by the fireplace, her face tight with a mixture of fear and greed. It's only fair, darling. We supported you. We gave you the education that allowed you to, well, to do whatever it is you did in the basement. We'll keep you on as the lead technician, of course, with a generous salary. And area? I asked, glancing at my sister, who was lurking in the doorway, looking caught between a desire for fame and a lingering sense of guilt. Area will be the face of Vesper, declared Silas. The world already saw the potential during the live stream. We'll market it as her evolution. You'll be the silent partner, the ghost in the machine. It's what you're good at, isn't it? Being invisible? He pushed a document toward me, a transfer of rights. It was a total surrender. Sign it, he said, or we'll sue you into the dirt. We'll claim theft of services, embezzlement of gear, and breach of fiduciary duty. You'll spend the next 20 years in a courtroom instead of a studio. I picked up the document, flipped through the pages, and then slowly, deliberately tore it in half. Then I tore it again. "What are you doing?" Silas roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "I'm saving you the cost of the ink, Dad," I said, leaning forward. "You're talking about the Thorne Family Trust of 1998, the one that was dissolved 3 years ago when you asked me to restructure the family assets to avoid the luxury tax audit." Silas froze. His hand moved toward a file cabinet, but stopped. "Don't bother looking for the old deed. I was the proud new owner of just about everything in the Thorne family." Don't bother looking for the old deed. When I restructured the assets, I created a new holding company, Vesper Horizon Ltd. I told you it was a shell company to protect Area's tour earnings. You were so bored by the boring details that you signed the transfer papers in the back of a limo on the way to the opera. You didn't even check the signature lines. I pulled a single laminated page from my blazer. It was a copy of the Master Asset Agreement. You didn't just sign over the music, Silas. You signed over the carriage house, the Belvedere estate, and the rights to the name Thorne in any commercial musical context. According to these papers, you are currently a tenant in a house owned by Vesper Horizon. And Area? She's a freelance contractor whose contract expired at midnight. You stole the house?" whispered Margaret, her voice trembling. "I didn't steal it. I reclaimed it. I paid the back taxes you forgot to pay. I settled the liens against the estate that you didn't even know existed because you were too busy buying vintage cellos. I saved this family from bankruptcy, but in doing so, I became the owner of the family." Silas looked at the document, his eyes darting across the legalese. He saw his own sprawling signature at the bottom. He saw the date. He saw the trap. "You can't do this," he hissed. "I'm your father. And I'm your producer. And as your producer, I've decided that your brand is no longer profitable. The mansion is being converted into a residential recording retreat for independent artists. You and Margaret have 30 days to relocate to the summer cottage in Maine. It's small, quiet, and perfectly suited for someone whose pure music no longer has an audience." Area stepped into the room, her face white. "And Area? Lyra, what about me? You said if I stayed silent, you'd give me a track.
I lied. I learned from the best. You stayed silent during the live stream, but you still tried to take the credit in the press interviews this morning. You told the Times that the new sound was your vision. You broke the only rule I had. I stood up, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like a closing door. The basement is being cleared out tomorrow. My new studio is in the city, in a building you don't have the key for. Silas, Margaret, the moving trucks will be here on the 1st of the month. Area, your golden voice is now a legacy act. I suggest you look into teaching. I hear there's a great demand for vocal coaches who can explain how not to lose their soul to a digital ghost. I walked out of the library, leaving them in the silence they had tried to impose on me for 20 years. As I walked down the grand staircase, I didn't feel the vibration of the house anymore. The house was dead. The music had moved on. I stepped out into the night air, the city lights shimmering in the distance. My phone buzzed, a notification from the charts. #1 Global Top 50, Vesper, the fine print. I smiled. It was the first time I had ever used a recording of Silas's voice in a track, specifically the sound of him screaming that I was tone deaf. It was the perfect beat. The shadow was gone, the sun was rising, and for the first time in my life, the only sound I heard was the one I chose to make.
The cottage in Maine was a far cry from the velvet-lined corridors of Belvedere Hill. It was a drafty, salt-crusted box on a cliff, where the only music was the relentless, discordant crashing of the Atlantic against the rocks. Inside, the Thorne dynasty was reduced to a small, cramped kitchen, where the smell of burnt toast replaced the aroma of expensive incense. I wasn't there to see it, of course. I was in my new penthouse studio in the city, a space made of glass and brushed steel that felt like the future. But I had my eyes on them. I had alerts set for every mention of the Thorne name, and this morning the internet was screaming. Aria had released a raw video from the cottage. She was sitting by a fireplace, looking deliberately disheveled, crying into the camera about how her jealous sister had stolen her inheritance and silenced her music. At the end of the video, she played a snippet of a new song, a petty, off-key attack on me produced on a cheap laptop. I sat at my console, sipping a black coffee, and watched the video go viral. Trending, #Justice for Aria, #The Vesper Betrayal. I didn't panic. I didn't even get angry. I simply tapped a button on my screen, connecting me to my legal team's secure server. The cease and desist is ready, Miss Thorne, as well as the copyright strike for the melodic. She used a 4-bar loop from your unreleased catalog that was stored on the cloud she still has partial access to. That's a direct violation of the Vesper Horizon Intellectual Property Agreement. Do it, I said, and send the invoice for the brand dilution. An hour later, Aria's video vanished from every platform. In its place was a sterile gray screen with a message, "This content has been removed at the request of the copyright owner." My phone rang. It was the private line for the cottage. I let it ring for 10 seconds before picking up. "You're a monster, Lyra." Aria's voice was a shrill, desperate mess. "You can't do this. You can't take my voice. I was talking to my fans. I was telling the truth." "You were using a Vesper-owned melodic to sell a lie, Aria, and you used the Aria Thorne brand name, which, as you recall from the papers Silas signed, is currently a wholly owned subsidiary of my company. Every time you use that name for commercial gain without my approval, you owe me $50,000. By my count, you're already $200,000 in debt to me this morning." "We have nothing," she screamed. "Dad is selling his vintage violins just to pay the heating bill. Mom is crying all day. How can you be so cold?" I learned from the masters area.
When I wanted to sing, you told me I was a rusted hinge. When I wanted to learn, you told me I was a maid. You didn't care about my voice when it was muffled by your dry cleaning. Why should I care about yours now? Please, she sobbed. I have a deal. An indie label in London wants to sign me. They don't care about the Thorn name. They just want the Vesper sound. If you just let me use that one track, the one from the live stream, I can pay you back. I can get Mom and Dad out of this hut. The Vesper sound belongs to Vesper, and Vesper doesn't work with artists that lack integrity. That track was a one-time gift to show the world what you could have been. But you chose to play the victim again. You chose the drama over the music. I'll tell everyone what you're doing, she threatened. I'll go to the tabloids. I'll tell the genius Vesper is just a spiteful girl in a basement. Go ahead, I smiled, though she couldn't see it. The tabloids love a fall from grace story. But remember, I own the carriage house where you recorded your last 3 albums. If I release the raw, unedited vocal stems, the ones where you can't hit a C sharp to save your life, your golden voice becomes a national joke. Is that the truth you want to share? The silence on the other end was absolute. I could almost hear the salt air whistling through the cracks in the cottage walls. What do you want from us, Lyra? She asked, her voice hollow. I want you to experience the silence you gave me, I said. I want you to sit in that cottage and listen to the waves. No microphones, no cameras, no applause. Just you and the realization that you have nothing to say that the world wants to hear. When you finally found a melody that isn't built on someone else's back, maybe then I'll stop the lawsuits. Until then, stay off the internet. I hung up. I turned back to my console. I pulled up a new project, a track built entirely from the sound of waves crashing against rocks. I'd sampled the audio from a hidden microphone I'd installed at the main cottage before they moved in. I titled the track, The Cliff's Edge. It was beautiful. It was lonely. It was the sound of a dynasty fading into the mist. I hit export, and as the progress bar moved across the screen, I realized I didn't hate them anymore. You don't hate the silence after the music stops. You just prepare for the next song.
The lobby of my headquarters was a cathedral of minimalism. White marble, silent elevators, and a scent like rain on ozone. I watched on the security monitor as Silas stepped out of a yellow taxi, a far cry from the chauffeured black sedans of his past. He looked diminished. His overcoat was slightly too large now, and he clutched his leather briefcase as if it held the last of his dignity. I let him wait. I let him sit in the reception area for 45 minutes, surrounded by platinum records and the gold-plated Grammys that didn't have the Thorn name on them. Dr. Thorn will see you now, my assistant said, her voice professional and detached. Silas walked into my studio. It was a massive room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. In the center, a young girl, maybe 19, was standing in the vocal booth. She was wearing a thrift store flannel shirt and had a look of raw, unpolished hunger in her eyes. "Lyra," Silas said, his voice cracking. He didn't look at the girl. He looked at me, sitting behind the largest solid-state Logic console in the country. "I didn't come here to fight. I came to tell you that the stress of the move, the legal battles, my heart isn't what it was. The doctors in Maine, they say I need peace. They say I need my family." "Peace is expensive, Silas," I said, not looking up from the faders. "And as for family, I recall you telling the board of the Philharmonic that I was a clerical error in your biological record. Why the sudden change in genealogy?" "I was wrong," he cried, stepping toward the console.
I see it now. You have the ear. You have the vision. This place, it's magnificent. But Arya is wasting away in that cottage. She's your sister. Just give her one chance to record here. Let her be the voice of Vesper again. For my sake. For a dying man's wish. I tapped a button on the intercom. Maya, take it from the bridge. Full power. No vibrato. The girl in the booth nodded. I hit record. Maya opened her mouth, and a sound came out that made the air in the room vibrate. It wasn't the trained mechanical perfection of Arya's opera trills. It was a jagged, soulful roar, a sound that sounded like it had been dragged through gravel and starlight. It was the sound of someone who had survived something. It was the sound of the future. Silas froze. He turned toward the glass of the vocal booth, his mouth hanging open. He knew voices. He spent 40 years judging them, and he knew within 3 bars that this girl was a once-in-a-generation phenomenon. "Who is that?" he whispered. "That's Maya," I said, stopping the track. "I found her singing for tips in the subway station under the conservatory where you used to teach. She doesn't have a pedigree, she doesn't have a legacy, but she has a soul that hasn't been polished into plastic by a controlling father." "She's incredible," Silas admitted, his shoulders sagging. "She's the new voice of Vesper Horizon," I said, standing up. "And she's the reason why Arya is never coming back. I don't need a sister who hates me. I need an artist who trusts me. Maya doesn't think I'm tone deaf. She thinks I'm the only person who ever truly heard her." "Lyra, please," Silas pleaded, his eyes filling with tears. "Don't replace us. Don't erase us like this. We are the Thorns." "The Thorns are a museum exhibit, Silas, and I've already donated the collection. If you're truly sick, I'll pay for the best specialists in Boston. I've already set up a medical trust. You'll have your peace, but you won't have my studio, and you won't have my silence ever again." "You're cold," he hissed, the old patriarch flickering back to life for a second. "You're colder than I ever was." "I'm not cold, Silas. I'm precise, just like you taught me. Every note has its place, and yours has already been played." I watched him walk down the hallway, a small gray man in a world of vibrant color. I went back to the console and looked at Maya through the glass. She was waiting, her eyes bright with the possibility of a life she never thought she'd have. "Again," I said into the microphone, "from the top, and this time make it hurt. Make them feel exactly what it's like to be invisible." Maya sang, and the sound filled the room, erasing the last echoes of the Thorn name from the air. I closed my eyes and smiled. The replacement wasn't just about the music. It was about the fact that I finally had someone in the booth who sang because she loved the sound, not because she feared the silence.
The release party for Maya's debut single, Subway Starlight, was held in a renovated industrial warehouse that pulsed with the raw neon energy of the new city. The air was thick with the scent of expensive gin, expensive leather, and the electric anticipation of a crowd that knew they were witnessing the birth of a phenomenon. I stood on the VIP balcony, looking down at the stage. I wasn't the girl in the shadows tonight. I was the architect. But the ghost of the past was already at the door. I saw Arya before she saw me. She had spent the last of her dwindling savings on a vintage designer gown that looked like armor from a war she had already lost. She moved through the crowd with the practiced grace of a queen, but the guests didn't bow. They whispered. They looked at her like a tragedy in slow motion. "Lyra!" she called out, spotting me. She pushed past the security guards, who looked at me for a signal. I gave a small nod. "Let her come."
She stormed onto the balcony, her face flushed, her eyes bright with a manic energy. "You really did it, didn't you? You found a street kid and put her in my spotlight? You think you can just swap a thorn for a nobody?" "Maya isn't a nobody, Arya," I said, leaning against the glass railing. "She's a musician, something you haven't been in a very long time. She sings because she has something to say. You sing because you want people to look at you." "I'm the voice people want," Arya hissed, grabbing my arm. "I went to the label heads today. They're interested. They said if I can prove I still have the range, they'll sign me despite your legal threats. I'm going to go down there on that stage and I'm going to sing the finale. I'm going to remind them who the real talent is." "You do that and I'll have you arrested for trespassing before you reach the first chorus," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "But I have a better idea, a professional one." Arya paused, her hand dropping from my arm. "What?" "Maya is incredible, but she's unpolished. She needs texture. She needs a vocal layer that sounds like, well, like the past being buried," I said, walking toward the small monitoring station on the balcony. "I have a track. It's the lead single for the album. It needs a secondary vocal, a background harmony that stays exactly 3 decibels below the lead." "You want me to do a duet?" Arya asked, a spark of hope flickering in her eyes. "No, Arya. I want you to be the background. No credit on the cover. No name in the press release. Just additional vocals. You'll stand behind the curtain just like I did for 20 years. You'll stay out of the light. You'll follow my hand and you'll hit the notes I tell you to hit." "You're joking," she whispered, her face turning a ghastly white. "You want me, Arya Thorne, the golden voice, to be a ghost for a subway singer?" "The pay is 5 times what Silas is making from his pension, and it's the only way you'll ever hear your voice on the radio again. If you do it, and if you do it perfectly, I'll drop the lawsuit for the copyright violation in Maine. I'll even pay off the mortgage on the cottage so Mom and Dad don't have to worry about the winter." Arya looked down at the stage where Maya was starting her sound check. The girl's voice rose up, a powerful, haunting sound that filled the warehouse. It was the sound of a new era, and Arya knew she wasn't in it. "Why?" Arya asked, her voice breaking. "Why do this to me?" "Because you need to learn what it's like to be the support, Arya. You need to understand that the music is bigger than the singer. You spent 2 decades treating me like an invisible tool. Now you can be the tool. Or you can go back to Maine and watch the waves until you're forgotten. The choice is yours. We start in 10 minutes. Arya stood there for a long time, the neon lights of the club reflecting in her eyes. I could see the battle inside her, the Thorne pride fighting against the cold, hard reality of survival. Slowly, she reached up and unzipped the back of her designer gown, revealing a simple black slip underneath. She took off her diamond earrings and handed them to me. "I'll do it," she said, her voice hollow. "Good," I said, pointing to the stairs. "The booth is behind the stage. There's a headset and a lyric sheet. Don't improvise, don't try to outshine her. If I hear even one unauthorized trill, I'll cut your mic and call the police." I watched her walk down the stairs, a fallen star descending into the shadows. I went back to my console and put on my headphones. The concert began. Maya was a force of nature. She owned the room from the first note. The crowd was hers. And then, at the bridge of the final song, I brought in the background track. Arya's voice entered, perfectly harmonized, perfectly subservient. It was beautiful, a haunting silver thread woven into Maya's golden tapestry. But no one looked at the curtain. No one asked who the second voice was. They were too busy screaming Maya's name. I sat there, controlling the faders, feeling the vibration of the sound in my very bones. I was the producer.
I was the one who decided who stood in the light and who stayed in the dark. As the final note faded and the crowd erupted in a standing ovation, I walked down to the stage as Maya was being mobbed by fans. I went behind the curtain. Arya was sitting on a folding chair, her head in her hands. She looked exhausted, but for the first time in her life, she didn't look fake. "You did well, Arya," I said, standing over her. The mix was perfect. "I heard myself," she whispered, looking up at me. "I heard myself through the speakers, and for the first time, I sounded like part of something, not the only thing, just part of it. That's the secret, Arya. The music doesn't belong to the Thorn name. It belongs to the air, and the air doesn't care who you are." I walked away, leaving her in the quiet of the backstage. I had one more part of the plan to finish. Tomorrow, I was going to Maine. It was time to settle the final account with the man who told me I couldn't hear.
The drive to the Maine cottage was a journey through a landscape of gray and blue, where the sky blurred into the Atlantic. I parked my car on the gravel path and stepped out into the biting wind. The house looked smaller than I remembered, a fragile wooden box clinging to the edge of the world. There was no music here, only the rhythmic, percussive roar of the tide. I walked up to the porch. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and damp wool. I followed a thin, hesitant sound coming from the small parlor. A piano, out of tune, being played by hands that were no longer steady. Silas was sitting at a battered, upright piano I'd bought for them when they moved. He didn't see me at first. He was staring at a sheet of staff paper, his fingers tracing a melody I recognized instantly. It was the bridge from Maya's song, the one Arya had sung background for. I stood in the doorway, my hands in the pockets of my trench coat. "You're off-key in the fourth bar, Silas," I said quietly. He jumped, his hands crashing against the keys in a dissonant cluster. He turned around, his face a map of deep lines and pale skin. For a moment, the old fire of the great conductor flickered in his eyes, but it died out quickly, replaced by a hollow, aching recognition. "Lyra," he whispered. "I didn't hear the car." "The wind is loud today," I said, walking toward the piano. I looked at his notations. He had been trying to transcribe my production by hand, trying to find the classical structure in my digital chaos. "I've been listening to the record," he gestured to a small, cheap radio on the windowsill. "Over and over. I heard Arya's voice in the harmony. I knew it was her. Only a thorn could hit that specific resonance, but I couldn't understand how she stayed so quiet, how she stayed so supportive." "She learned that from me, Silas," I said, sitting on a wooden stool across from him. "She learned that the music doesn't need a queen, it needs a foundation." Silas looked at his hands, his fingers trembling. "I spent my whole life looking for the perfect tone. I thought it was something I could build, something I could dictate. I thought you were a failure because you didn't fit the mold I carved. But I sat here, in this silence, and I realized I was the one who was deaf." He looked up at me, tears welling in his tired eyes. "The way you layered the bass with the cello, the way you used the silence between the beats, it's genius, Lyra. It's a language I didn't speak. I told you you couldn't hear, but the truth is, I was just refusing to listen." I felt a strange, cold wave of relief wash over me. I didn't need his validation. I had won the world without it, but hearing it felt like a surgical stitch finally closing an old, jagged wound. "I didn't come here for an apology, Silas," I said, pulling a legal envelope from my coat. "I've come to finish the business. I've paid off the cottage. The title is in your and Margaret's names now. You have enough in the medical trust to live comfortably. You don't owe Vesper Horizon anything, not even your silence." Why? He asked, his voice breaking. After everything I did, after how I treated you. Because I'm not a thorn anymore, Silas, I said, standing up. I'm Vesper, and Vesper doesn't build her success on the suffering of others. I don't need you to be small for me to be big. I'm already big enough. I walked to the door, but I stopped when I heard him hit a single pure note on the piano. Wait, he called out. Lyra, can you hear it now? The melody I'm trying to write. It's for you. It's a concerto for a daughter who found her voice in the dark. I looked back at him, the man who had been the sun of my universe, now a flickering candle in a drafty room. I listened for a moment. The melody was beautiful, old-fashioned and hopelessly out of touch with the world I now lived in. But for the first time, it was honest. It's a good melody, Silas, I said, a small, genuine smile touching my lips. It's your song, not mine. Finish it. Sing it for the waves. They're the only audience that won't judge you. I walked out of the cottage and back to my car. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw Aria standing on the cliffside watching me leave. She didn't wave, and neither did I. We were no longer bound by blood or by debt. We were just two musicians, moving in different directions. I turned on my own radio. Maya's voice filled the car, a powerful, soaring sound that made the very windows vibrate. I didn't think about the charts. I didn't think about the money. I just listened to the texture of the sound, the way the high notes danced over the deep, heavy bass I had created. I wasn't tone-deaf. I never had been. I just heard the future while they were stuck in the past. The shadow was gone. The silence was over. And as I drove toward the city lights, the only voice I heard was my own, loud, clear, and finally perfectly in tune.